Welcome to Sinful's Horror Stories. At the end of this video, I want you guys to take some time in the comment section below after you've watched the video. You guys can feel free to ask me any personal questions that you want. I want to get to know you guys on a much more personal level, and I want you guys to know me on a much more personal level. I figure why not? What I will go ahead and do at the end of my next upload is answer some of those questions right here on the mic. I won't type a response, I'll give an actual verbal response and kind of a shout out to the subscriber that sent it in. So be sure to comment in the comment section below, and I will pick my 2 favorite questions at the end of the next video. So keep your eyes peeled and your ears open. Sit back, relax, stay sinful. Story number 1. I'm 22. I live alone in a 1-bedroom apartment, which actually looks more like a motel room with a tiny kitchen in it. Despite its small size, I've managed to distribute all of my furniture and appliances to give it a very comfy feeling. Next to the entrance door, there is TV space with a 2-person sofa, a red armchair, and a wooden coffee table. Next to this, there's this dining space / kitchen with the table, the stove, a sink, and a fridge. My bed is located by the wall opposite to the entrance door, so I can watch TV while lying down, which is great. Behind the TV, there's quite a large window that has several parallel glass panels that are tilted open, with white curtains covering it. My room is in a second row of 4 rooms in total that connect with a row of other rooms, forming an L shape. In the middle of this inexpensive compound of rooms, there's a space with some trees where some of the neighbors keeps their cars and bikes, and everything is enclosed by high walls and a remote-operated electric gate. The rooms are connected by a long porch, lit up at night with fluorescent lights. There is 1 light in front of every apartment. This light allows me to see through the curtains, like the shape of a tree closest to my room. This made me feel uneasy the first couple of months after moving here. I was sure one night I'd see something scary through the curtains, like Norman Bates' shape behind the shower curtain in Psycho. But all I ever got to see was my neighbors' silhouettes moving around, chasing cats away or just out for a smoke. The gate and walls made me feel safer, and I got used to that. I've been living here now for 2 years. One night 3 months ago, I was lying on my bed reading an ebook on my laptop when I heard a whistled tune outside. It was a creepily happy melody, like carousel music, or at least that's what it made me think of. My first thought was that it was my neighbor who smokes a lot, and he was out having a cigarette. But then that meant he wasn't really smoking, because the whistling was continuous, unpaused. I'm not the most courageous guy around, so getting up to look outside was never an option for me. When something scared me, I always decided to lie down facing the wall and try to fall asleep, which is exactly what I did this time, but the whistling got louder in seconds. I could hear it was getting closer to my window. I got shivers running down my spine, and I closed my eyes tightly, hoping it was the landlady next door, drunk and trying to find her way into her room. The whistling got even louder now. It was right in front of my room. I turned around slowly away from the wall to face my apartment, and then I saw it. Through the white curtains, I could see the distinctive shape of a man with long hair, and he was facing directly toward my room. He didn't move. He was just standing there whistling this horrible tune that made me feel inside a horror movie. Was this some kind of pervert trying to watch me sleep or something? But he didn't move. He stood there for what felt like hours, not moving a single muscle. I'm not sure why, but now it was clear to me that he wasn't one of the neighbors. I wondered if anybody else in the place had heard him. I couldn't turn my eyes away from him. I thought about all the psychos from Scary Stories, and that if I pulled the curtains aside, I would see the most twisted face staring at me. I armed myself with courage to mutter the words, "Who's there?" which barely came out of my mouth. No answer. The silhouette just stood there, still whistling. "Who's there?" I asked now in a more aggressive tone. This is when the shape turned around and started walking slowly towards my front door. Hopefully it was ultimately one of my neighbors, or maybe a creepy guest, and was now heading inside their room. Then my door handle moved. He was trying to get inside my place. This is when I completely lost it. I grabbed my cell phone, went into the bathroom and locked myself in. I called the police first and then the landlord, who lived next door in a house. I explained that there was someone trying to break into my apartment. I was sure I'd be dead by the time they came, but it turned out the whistler had given up. The police would get him now, but they couldn't find anyone. When the police arrived, I told them what had happened, and they searched the entire neighborhood. One of the neighbors said that she had seen everything from her room, but did not have a cell phone to call anyone. She said that after trying to get in, the guy, who was wearing saggy clothes and looked homeless, walked nonchalantly towards the perimeter wall, climbed up, and jumped over it. And he never stopped whistling. The landlord got electric barbed wire on top of the walls after this, and I haven't seen anything but that tree through the curtains since then. I still sleep with my face turned to the wall, but I always think I'll hear the whistling one more time. Story number 2. I think I should give a little of background before I tell the story. I was 16 at the time, slightly rebellious, and was into underage drinking. So it was Halloween, and me and 3 others, David, Luke, and Ryan, were in an abandoned warehouse about 20 minutes outside of town. It was a fun night. You know, the drinking, joking, and scary stories to put the shits up, which means scaring people. I'm generally not easily scared, but one story that caught my attention was that of a pedophile who had moved back into town and was living near the park I had to walk through to get home. It was all the gossip in town, but details of what he had done sent shivers down my spine. Jump forward to 3 a.m. We decided to call it a night. I had totally forgotten about the story and was moving with the wind and minding my own business. I lived the furthest away from the town and was the final friend to break off home. I finally semi-stumbled into the entrance of the park and began to walk through. I'm the type of person who usually walks with my head at a slight downwards angle, looking at the ground to make sure I don't step in dog shit. I don't know what possessed me to look up, but I did. I caught a glimpse of what I thought was a person behind one of the trees. I second-guessed myself since I looked again, and lo and behold, there was a man behind the tree, staring at me. I froze for a split second just to process what the fuck was going on, and then it hit me. That man could be the pedophile that is living in the town. I turned around and made a crazy quick dash back the way I came. Oh, I forgot to mention he was only 30 feet away from me. As I was running, I looked back and saw him running after me. My heart was pounding, and my knees were shaking more than they ever had in my entire life. I could not stop running. I finally made it to a road and flagged a car down. I told them what happened and they waited around while I called the police. The man in question was never to be seen. After that night, I decided to never drink outside, and if I did, then I would pay for a taxi straight to my house. After I finished typing this, shivers were all over my body and tears nearly coming through at the fear I had felt that day. Story number 3. This is something that happened to my friends and I as kids, and is more of a disturbing discovery than a disturbing person. We were probably somewhere between 11 and 14 at the time, and this took place during the middle of the summer. It was also something I didn't really come to understand until much later in life, when there was no way to resolve what he and I had seen. My house was in a valley. There were a few homes along the street with it, but the large hills on either side were undeveloped forest back then. My friend and I would hike up the hill behind my house, through a few miles of woods, and out the other side there was a neighborhood that had a farm stand style shop with local honey and a bunch of cheap candy. We also just hung out in the woods a lot and would tell each other scary stories as we headed back home. None of them were as scary as looking back on this one, but younger me was always a little spooked on the way back to my house. At dusk, we decided to head back for the day. I spotted a bit of white in the mound of moss. As a kid, I was always looking for interesting stuff to take home and collect, so I was immediately ready to go dig it out of the moss. When I did, I found it was a pelvis bone. It had probably been there a long time. I remember it was pockmarked and dirty, worn away slightly from time. I was pretty scared for a moment, but I remembered that all sorts of animals have pelvis bones, and that this one must be from a deer or something. In my childish need to be know-it-all and jumping at my first non-frightening possibility, I told my friend it was a deer pelvis. We marveled at it for a while, but put it back because I knew my dad would be mad if we brought back an old deer bone. I forgot about it for a long time. Many, many years went by, but eventually I learned more about the shape of a human body as opposed to animals. I remember the shape I found quite clearly. It was almost certainly a human bone, and the size wouldn't have been an adult. I wonder what else was in that mound, who it might have been, and if my finding it could have been given someone somewhere else some closure. I went back and looked for it twice, thinking I might remember the part of the woods it had been in, but I never found it again. Story number 4. I've always been uncomfortable with the story that I'm about to type to you all, partly because it was so odd and out of the ordinary. I thought it would be interesting to share my own camping scary story experience. This happened during the summer of 2012 when I was 15 and still an active member of a local Boy Scouts troop. I went camping, something my troop had done frequently. The camp we chose was for a full weekend. It was a nice forested area with taller grass. It also lacked other campers. We saw no cars driving in or out throughout the time we spent there. Since we did not have to worry about other campers, our troop had a big campfire on Saturday night that went late into the night. Eventually our campfire started to die out, prompting us to put it out and head to our respective tents and hit the hay. Oddly for me, I was unable to sleep that night. I usually slept well on campouts, especially when I have the pleasure of using a tent alone, like I had done on this occasion. So I sat there in complete silence listening to the various sounds around my tent. Eventually I found myself dozing off until I heard something walking near our site. There was a very apparent rustling of grass that began to get closer and closer to the blob of tents that our boys were sleeping in. After a solid minute of movement, the sound stopped right in front of a tent that was about 7 or so feet from mine. I then heard the rustling start up again and head off in the direction of the forest. I was paralyzed with fear. What could have made that sound? I thought about it for a solid few minutes and eventually decided it must have been an adult checking on us. Before I went to sleep, I looked out the little tent mesh window at the side of my tent and did not see anything out of the ordinary in our campsite. The sound went on for a bit in the distance, but I did not record for how long as I eventually fell asleep. I woke up later that night to the same sound of rustling, yet this time it was close to our tent circle, as it was the first time I heard it. While I did not think too much of this, I silently listened to the sound to see where it headed. It once again went to the same area it did the first time. Being curious, I peered through the tent window to see what was making the noise. My face turned white and I could not move. My mind was still trying to register what was going on. I saw a large black figure standing before the tent in the darkness. and it was clear it was not a scout, as the figure had no flashlight on, was far too large to be any boy in our troop. Suddenly the figure inched their hand to the tent door and began to slowly unzip it. After what felt like several minutes, the figure seemed to poke their head into the tent. Immediately after, a deafening screech came from the tent. I heard other tents being unzipped and saw lights being flashed at the one tent, as well as a black figure starting to run from the tent. Within seconds, the figure was running out of view and into the night. A few of the adults at adult camp came to see the commotion. The boys who were in the tent told what they had experienced, and several boys mentioned that they had heard the sound of rustling in the grass around our tents throughout the night. Unfortunately, none of the boys were able to get a clear view of the person, except that the figure looked like a man and that he wore dark clothing. The adults had us moved to a different campsite, and 2 adults volunteered to stay awake for the rest of the night, in case the man returned. The next morning, we quickly packed up our stuff and left as fast as possible. We warned the ranger in charge, who called the local sheriff. From what I know, the person was never caught, and our troop never camped there again. It was easily one of the most frightening experiences, something I would always remember when I went camping during my time as a Boy Scout. Be sure to leave a like, comment, share, and subscribe for future content. Remember what I said at the beginning of the video, guys. Each person can leave a personal question about me in the comment section below, and I'll choose the best 2 questions in the following video, and I will answer them at the beginning of the next video. Have a great weekend, and stay sinful.